Hello everyone, today I'm going to be going over the finer details of the Integrated Humanities eAssessment. I've been a teacher of the Integrated Humanities course at a school that does the MYP Certificate. So the students went through the eAssessments, and I was ultimately a coordinator of a school doing the MYP Certificate, running eAssessments. I'm going to be presenting information that's actually freely available to you within the subject guide, but I'm going to intersperse that with my own experience and observations, having done this a number of times across a number of schools. So let's get into it. Being here, you probably know what an eAssessment is, but just to clarify and make sure, let's go over it quickly. This is an end qualification or a final qualification for MYP 5. The IB recognised that potentially there needed to be the option for a final assessment in the MYP, similar to GCSEs, and came up with the idea of eAssessments as a way to do that. Me personally, I think it's a great preparation for the diploma, the MYP certificate, and it would be great for more schools to do it. It's meant to test the student's ability to apply ATL skills in the context of their subject. It's not like other exam boards where it's based around prescribed content or a centralized syllabus. We're going to go over it, but basically the IB provides recommendations for content, not guidelines for content. What sets this exam apart from other exams is that it's delivered and completed by the students entirely digitally. So there'll be other videos in the future about how that looks from an organizational perspective. So stay tuned for that and subscribe if you're interested. And the exam itself is externally graded. So it's done by examiners from the IB, and that externally moderated grade is provided to the students. So the Integrated Humanities course is a course that covers what's called the humanities. A well-constructed Integrated Humanities course will cover a wide range of disciplines from within the humanities. This isn't an exhaustive list. You could essentially include anything considered to be humanities under this umbrella, and it would work out, as you'll see when we look at the recommended topic list. But definitely things like history, geography, business, economics, sociology, politics, all feature heavily. I would suggest the best practice in a school planning would be to align the focus areas of the Integrated Humanities course with the types of humanities offerings that you make at the diploma level, but that's a whole other topic entirely. The Integrated Humanities course is one that is quite difficult to teach and plan well, simply because teachers tend to specialize in one or two of these areas rather than all of these areas. What you risk happening is the history teacher having an unbalanced focus on history within the Integrated Humanities course, and the other areas kind of are left undeveloped, unloved in a sense. So you really have to be intentional from a course design perspective to make sure you're getting kind of equal screen time for each of those humanities areas that you decide to include. The recommended content comes directly from the guide, and the IB is really clear that it's not, not a mandated syllabus. You can see from that they've left things pretty wide open. Even this first topic here, you can see superpowers, empires, and supranational institutions and organizations. This leaves it pretty wide open to look at superpowers during the Cold War, for example. We could look at the modern world and the idea of American hegemony. Empires, we could look at trade and the British Empire. We could look at the Russian Empire, the French Empire. Supranational organizations covers things such as the United Nations or the G20, OPEC. Each of these points is really structured in a way that it provides a theme, and the teacher or the school provides the content. A useful way you can kind of satisfy these points is to structure it above a national curriculum. You could, theoretically speaking, and quite easily take GCSE humanities content and fit it under these points. You can see there's quite a few. This is not all of them. We have 6 here covering things like economics, history, business, economics, and then we have another 6 here, so 12 in total. Things like growth and development indicators, which is very much geography, industrialization, which is potentially economics and history going on there, population, again, geography, sustainable management of systems, we're talking about, again, geography there. And so with 12 kind of, we could say, recommended areas of exploration, it doesn't leave you with a lot of time in MYP 4 and 5. So you have to be very intentional with the program development for MYP 4 and 5 to make sure you're kind of hitting these in some way, or at least providing the students with some knowledge they can use or reference in the exam, which we'll get to in a moment. Like I said, it's not to be considered an IB-approved curriculum by any means. I've found personally best practice is to structure the program around them if you intend to take the eAssessments. What it does is it indicates that these are areas examiners will consider when constructing the questions. So it does narrow things down a bit. They do say, that it can be anything and they'll provide you with the information you need within the exams. But many of the questions do ask the students to bring in outside examples. So the more relevant examples we can provide them, the easier it's going to be for them and the better results. So one thing to note is that these topics are essentially mapped backwards from the diploma level subjects in those areas, which is why I mentioned it would be good practice to align the kind of humanities areas you focus on to those that you cover in your school at the diploma level, just so we can build that alignment between programs more effectively and help the students when they get to diploma, which is really the main reason why we would even consider doing the MYP certificate, is to prepare them for diploma. As we'll go over when we look at the questions in each section of the exam, the students will be asked to draw on knowledge from their lessons when answering some of the questions. So having that knowledge available to them is part of our task when we're constructing the Integrated Humanities course. Here is the structure of the exam. So you can see that there's a heavy focus on the thinking critically criteria. A good, 1/3 of all the marks, really, or even a bit more than half of all the marks there is thinking critically, almost half rather of the marks is thinking critically. Investigating 26 marks and communicating 18 marks. What we're going to look at here in a moment is kind of what you can expect in each section of the exam. They do have a way of throwing the unexpected at you, but there is some predictability. If you look at all of the past exams and what comes up, there are some sections which are more or less predictable in what you can get. The exam itself looks like, I can't show it on the screen, but it's like an online exam. You navigate through the questions using a sidebar. And what happens is that with each set of questions, a variety of sources and information will be presented. The idea is that if a student has the necessary skills that they've gained throughout the course, they should be able to process and use any of the content that's kind of presented to them effectively in the exam, saying essentially that even if the topic is new to the student, they should be successful with what's provided. This can be text-based, articles, journals, which are also text-based, blogs, data presented in tables or on graphs, charts, animations, images. You tend to find there's a good variety. They won't just provide text-based sources, or database sources. There'll be some variety in there. Charts are really common, especially like interactive charts or charts that have kind of multimedia elements, you'll find are quite common. So the students will have to kind of interact with those in the exam to get the information they need. The questions themselves, or the answers to those questions, are text-based. So the majority of questions in the Integrated Humanities exam, you're writing your answer. But there are some questions, especially in the communicating section, I find, that make use of the on-screen tools. So usually these are kind of drag and drop functionality, where maybe the students create a flowchart, a graph. I've seen quite commonly, not just in Integrated Humanities, but also the Language and Literature exam, tools for the construction of posters or some kind of image. Usually, so there's some kind of bank of shapes, images, designs available, and the students would like kind of drag and drop those onto a canvas area and construct that image or poster or whatever it happens to be. They're pretty intuitive, so they are designed to be simple. The only way you can really practice with such tools is to run practice exams using past exams, which is not as easy as with paper exams, but I'll be going over that in future videos as well, how you can conduct those mock exams or use the exams as classroom teaching tools. The first section, right, is investigating. And I consider this to be the most predictable section of the exam. If you look at the bank of past papers that are available, it tends to follow a pretty standard structure. It tends to have the formulation of a research question. This is usually a 2-mark question, if I recall correctly. And that's something that can be practiced quite a bit before the exam, and you can be almost 100% confident that it will appear on the exam. Similarly, they usually ask for some kind of action plan, essentially the students outlining and describing how they would conduct an investigation on a given topic. This is also something that you can practice quite frequently. In advance of the exam, you can throw them different scenarios and say, well, how would you investigate this? How would you investigate that? And so you can kind of drill them a bit on that. And an evaluation of process and results. In terms of teaching, you could actually use kind of peer marking and peer feedback to work on this particular skill of evaluating others' process and results. This is, like I said, the most predictable section, and it should be I wouldn't say no marks are easy marks, but this should be a good basis of marks for the students so that we can get everyone to a passing standard pretty easily and then kind of try and upgrade people from there. The communicating section is really focused on modifying the style and content of whatever you create to a specific audience. It's here where you tend to see those drag and drop functionality tasks, either here or in the next section. The students will be provided a scenario, an audience, and something that they need to communicate. And the mode of communication can be written. Usually there will be at least definitely one that is written. And there can be also one that is that kind of more multimedia focused one. They tend to choose like interesting text types here. So an exam from maybe last session or the session before, I can't recall exactly, was the creation of a podcast script. So these are usually suggested at around 300 words. what you'll see on the exams is they do provide kind of a suggested word count for these kinds of questions. It's not a strict limit, rather they just suggest that you should write about 300 words for this task. But you really should train the students to look for that suggestion of words, and they should use that as a guide. One thing I should mention with these kind of extended written responses, which you kind of have to train the students on, is that there's no spell checker available. Now, there's not a criteria that directly relates to grammar or spelling in integrated humanities. What we have to watch for is if the spelling and grammar errors impact understanding. So they have to be used to not using that spell checker as a crutch and getting their point across without it. So creative writing, blogs, letters, scripts, speeches, presentations, I've seen all of them used before in some way or another on these exams, and the students need to be well versed in those various text styles. You probably want to work in conjunction or have some kind of collaborative planning with the language and literature department to make sure that the students are capable of writing in these different styles and text types. It helps the language and literature department as well, because in their exam there is that variance of text types as well. So working together to make sure the students can do the different styles of writing will be very important. Then the last section is that thinking critically section, that one worth the big 36 marks. And realistically speaking, this is where we get the students who are going to achieve 5s, 6s, and 7s, depending on how they do in this section. So this is using command terms, those higher order command terms, things like discuss, analyze, etc. And the main feature of this section, the biggest question worth 20 marks, is usually an extended piece of writing, an essay. Usually they don't tend to play with the text type on that question. It does usually is presented as some form of essay, whether it's argumentative or analytical one, it will be an essay. The structure of this question is normally asking them to comment on a specific issue, drawing on both examples provided in the exam and knowledge they have from the course content. So essentially ask them to bring in examples from their knowledge in conjunction with what's presented in the exam. So this is something you can kind of train them on, I would say. And being a 20-mark question, they're going to have around 30 to 40 minutes, depending on how they've gone on the other questions, to complete it. So it's actually the kind of task that you can practice within a lesson. You give them warning if you want, saying next time you come in, we're going to do an essay on a topic that's unseen. They come in, present it, and off they go. Time them, and depending on the length of each of your lessons in your school, you would even have some time for some kind of peer feedback round after that, potentially, if you've got 60 or 80-minute long lessons. And this is that essay kind of structure and style. It's very much a humanities skill that you should be training throughout the MYP, but definitely in MYP 4 and 5. So a few points to close off. The command terms are really important. I've found as a teacher of diploma, the command terms are really emphasized, whereas from the perspective of an MYP teacher and MYP coordinator, there seems to be more of an emphasis in the MYP on learner profile and skills. For success in the eAssessment, though, you need to lean a bit more heavily into command terms. So using what knowledge you have of diploma there to really drill the students on those command terms, because all of the questions in the eAssessment are structured around the IB command terms, and the students should be going into the exam being very familiar with them. there's some random element. There's plenty of command terms to use. Like I mentioned, though, especially in that investigating section, the same command terms kind of come up again and again. Usually for the research question, the one which asks them to propose a research question, it's usually state, for example, state a research question. So going through the past exams can help you kind of see which ones repeat themselves over and over. Then we have the global context. So you may or may not be aware that before each eAssessment session, an overarching global context for the session is announced. It provides the main topic for the interdisciplinary unit, and there will be at least one question in each subject exam related to that global context. It's intended really to tie together the subjects and display that like interdisciplinary nature of the MYP program. One thing to be cautious of, though, is the entire exam for Integrated Humanities won't be on that global context. There will be at least one question that relates directly to that global context, but the other questions in the exam can be kind of from completely different areas. So don't be caught by surprise on that one. And overall, I would say just a good knowledge amongst the students of the global contexts and what they mean would be good practice. So if you have any other questions about the Integrated Humanities eAssessment that I haven't covered here, go ahead and put them in the comments below and I'll definitely respond. I'm happy to help anyone who's trying to do them for the first time or get better at running the Integrated Humanities eAssessment. If you want more content in the future about the MYP, the eAssessments, more is to come, so please like and subscribe. Thank you.